In the small, tightly knit community of Lakeview Estates, the presence of an ambitious homeowners association, HOA, loomed large, with one figure standing at its forefront, the president, Margaret Sinclair. With an iron grip on the board of directors, Margaret had cultivated a reputation for her relentless pursuit of order and control. Her tenure was marked by stringent rules regarding landscaping, property appearances, and even noise levels, all aimed at preserving her vision of a pristine neighborhood. However, recent efforts hinted at a more troubling ambition. Margaret was determined to expand her authority beyond the established HOA boundaries, targeting properties that were legally exempt from HOA regulations. This expansionist mindset ignited tensions within the community, as residents began to question her motives. Stories circulated about Margaret's attempts to enforce rules on properties that clearly belonged to owners outside her jurisdiction, yet she persisted. Margaret's latest crusade culminated in her sights being set on a picturesque lakefront property owned by David Thompson, an avid outdoorsman known for his legal hunting practices. When David engaged in his favored pastime on his own land, Margaret saw an opportunity to assert her power. Fueled by a thirst for control and perhaps a misguided sense of duty, she prepared to confront him, unaware that this encounter would spiral into an unprecedented conflict that would challenge her authority and define the fate of their community. David Thompson's lakefront property was a hidden gem nestled within the natural beauty of Lakeview Estates, a sanctuary that drew admiration from locals for its serene views and rich biodiversity. Spanning several acres, the land bordered on a pristine lake, its surface shimmering under the sun, surrounded by lush trees and vibrant wildlife. The property featured a charming cabin where David often hosted family gatherings and enjoyed quiet weekends immersed in nature. What set this property apart was not just its idyllic scenery but also its legal status. David had meticulously ensured that his land was exempt from HOA regulations, having acquired it long before the HOA was established in the community. This legal buffer afforded him freedoms unheard of in most neighborhoods, allowing him to partake in activities such as hunting, a passion he cherished and pursued responsibly on his own land. As Margaret set her sights on this prized property, she overlooked crucial details regarding its ownership and jurisdiction. Her misunderstanding or willful ignorance of David's rights would soon lead to an explosive confrontation. Unfazed by the rules that did not apply to him, David felt empowered to enjoy his property as he saw fit, unaware that Margaret's ambition would challenge that peace. Little did he know, Margaret's determination to exert her influence would soon draw them into a conflict that would expose her overreach and test the very foundations of community governance in Lakeview Estates. The conflict ignited one crisp autumn afternoon when David was out on his property, preparing for a hunting trip. The vibrant leaves rustled in the gentle breeze, and the air was filled with the earthy scent of fallen foliage. As he set up his gear near the lake's edge, he felt a sense of peace envelop him, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. Margaret Sinclair, fueled by her ever-growing desire for control, had spotted David from her own yard. That moment sparked her outrage. She believed his hunting activities violated HOA regulations despite not having any jurisdiction over his land. With a sense of self-importance, she marched toward him, resolute in her mission to assert authority. "David! I need to talk to you," Margaret called as she approached, her demeanor brimming with authority. "What you're doing here is against HOA rules. You can't just hunt whenever you feel like it." David paused, taken aback by her sudden intrusion. "Margaret, this is my property. I have every right to hunt here legally," he replied calmly, standing firm against her accusations. Unfazed by his assertion, Margaret continued to press her case, citing vague and irrelevant regulations that had no bearing on his land. In a dramatic move aimed at intimidation, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911, insisting on law enforcement intervention to enforce rules that simply did not apply. The tension escalated as David realized this was not just a dispute over property, it was a clash of wills that would soon unravel into a public spectacle. As the argument escalated, Margaret Sinclair's frustration reached a tipping point. With her voice raised, she made it clear that she wouldn't back down, despite David's calm reassurances regarding his rights. "This isn't just your little hunting ground, you're breaking HOA regulations," she shouted, her face flushed with indignation. In a dramatic and impulsive move, Margaret pulled out her cell phone and dialed 911, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke into the receiver. "Yes, I need to report a violation of HOA rules at Lakeview Estates," she asserted frantically, her tone laced with urgency. There's a man hunting on private property that falls under our jurisdiction. David watched in disbelief as Margaret continued to misrepresent the situation to the dispatcher, his initial shock turning into a mix of anger and resolve. He could hear her insisting that the police needed to intervene immediately, claiming that residents were at risk because of his legal hunting practices. As the dispatcher began asking questions, Margaret grew impatient, interrupting to insist they send officers right away. "You don't understand. This is urgent," she exclaimed, her desperation evident. The call transformed what started as a simple disagreement into a public spectacle, drawing the attention of neighbors peeking through their windows. David felt his heart race. He never imagined that exercising his rights would lead to involvement with law enforcement. This was no longer merely about hunting, it was about asserting his autonomy against an overreaching HOA president determined to impose her will by any means necessary. As Margaret's call to 911 echoed in the air, David felt a surge of determination course through him. He understood that this confrontation was not merely about hunting, it was a test of his rights as a property owner against an overreaching HOA president. Steeling himself, he took a deep breath and prepared to stand his ground. David quickly moved to his cabin, where he had kept meticulous records of his property ownership and its exemption from HOA jurisdiction. He retrieved the documents, including the original deed and correspondence confirming his legal status. The weight of these papers felt reassuring in his hands. They symbolized his rights and the countless hours he had invested in maintaining his sanctuary. As he stepped back outside, David noticed neighbors beginning to gather, curiosity etched on their faces as they watched the unfolding drama. He knew he had to project confidence, not just for himself but for those witnessing the confrontation. "Margaret," he called out firmly, "you're mistaken about my property. I have every right to hunt here, and I can prove it." He held up the documents for her and the onlookers to see, emphasizing his legal ownership with a calm yet resolute demeanor. "This land is mine, free from HOA control. You cannot dictate what I do on my own property." With each word, David felt more empowered, ready to confront not only Margaret's claims but also her misguided sense of authority. This was about more than just hunting, it was about reclaiming his independence and standing firm against unjust encroachment on his rights. As David stood firm, clutching his legal documents, the tension in the air thickened with the sound of approaching sirens. The wail of police vehicles pierced through the autumn calm of Lakeview Estates, drawing even more curious onlookers to the scene. David's heart raced. He knew that the arrival of law enforcement could either validate his position or complicate matters further. Two officers stepped out of their patrol car, their expressions a blend of professionalism and curiosity as they surveyed the gathering crowd. They approached Margaret first, who was quick to point a finger at David, her voice laced with urgency. "This man is hunting illegally on property that belongs to the HOA, she insisted, her attempt to maintain authority evident in her tone. The officers exchanged glances before turning their attention to David, who stood resolute and ready to present his case. "Officer," he began, gesturing to the documents in his hand, "I'm legally allowed to hunt here. This property is exempt from HOA rules." One officer nodded thoughtfully while the other examined David's documents more closely. As they read through the legal details that clearly established David's rights, the atmosphere shifted. Voices quieted, and murmurs spread among the neighbors who had come to watch. After what felt like an eternity, one of the officers looked back at Margaret, who suddenly appeared less certain of her claims. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "this property does not fall under your jurisdiction." The realization struck hard. Margaret's authority had been called into question, and now her credibility hung by a thread as the foundation of her power began to crumble before everyone's eyes. With the police now fully engaged, David felt a surge of confidence as the officers began to scrutinize his documents. "This is the original deed to my property," he explained, pointing to the highlighted sections that clearly outlined its legal status. "It explicitly states that my land is exempt from all HOA regulations and oversight." The officers listened intently, flipping through the paperwork as David continued. He provided them with correspondence from the HOA that affirmed his rights, detailing how he had fought to clarify the legal boundaries when the association was first established. "I legally own this land, and I've maintained it in full compliance with state laws," he stated firmly. As David articulated his position, he noticed the expressions on the officers' faces shift from curiosity to understanding. They began nodding in acknowledgement as they grasped the gravity of Margaret's overreach. "It seems there's been a misunderstanding," one officer remarked to his partner, gesturing towards Margaret. David seized the moment, turning to address both the officers and the spectators who had gathered nearby. "This confrontation isn't just about hunting, it's about respecting property rights and ensuring that no one's authority is abused." Margaret's attempt to impose control was becoming increasingly tenuous as David presented his case with clarity and conviction. The realization that the law was on his side bolstered his resolve. He was not merely defending himself but standing up for all homeowners against unwarranted intrusions on personal freedoms. It was clear now that he had turned the tide in this escalating conflict, showcasing his independence from the HOA's misguided ambitions. In the aftermath of the confrontation, the fallout for Margaret Sinclair and the HOA became increasingly apparent. Once viewed as an unwavering authority figure, Margaret now faced scrutiny not only from residents but also from her own board members, who were concerned about her reckless behavior and its potential ramifications. The public embarrassment she endured, coupled with doubt cast on her leadership, placed her position in jeopardy. As David reviewed the events that had unfolded, he felt a growing determination to take action against Margaret's abuses of power. He consulted with a local attorney and learned that he had grounds to file a lawsuit for harassment and false claims. The conversation was eye-opening. While he had initially sought only to protect his rights, the prospect of legal repercussions for Margaret was too enticing to ignore. David's attorney explained how Margaret's actions could be construed as both defamatory and a violation of his rights as a homeowner. "You have a strong case," she confirmed, outlining how Margaret had deliberately misrepresented facts to law enforcement in a futile attempt to enforce unapplicable HOA rules. With each revelation, David's resolve solidified. Not only would filing a lawsuit restore his dignity and assert his autonomy, it would also send a clear message about the consequences of unchecked authority within community organizations. As whispers of his potential legal action began circulating in Lakeview Estates, many neighbors started re-evaluating their perspectives on the HOA's governance, feeling emboldened by David's fight against Margaret's overreach. This conflict would not merely change David's life, it threatened to reshape the foundations of their community. As news of the conflict spread throughout Lakeview Estates, the community began to react with a mix of support for David Thompson and growing discontent towards Margaret Sinclair's authoritarian tactics. Conversations erupted in backyards and at community gatherings, with many residents expressing their frustrations over the HOA's overreach. "If they can do this to David, who's next?" one neighbor remarked, fueling a collective sense of unease regarding Margaret's rule. Support for David grew as residents learned about his legal rights and the unjust claims made against him. Many began to rally around him, viewing his struggle as a stand against tyranny. A grassroots movement emerged, urging residents to attend upcoming HOA meetings to voice their concerns and demand accountability from their leaders. Flyers circulated, encouraging neighbors to unite against oppressive governance that threatened their freedoms. On social media platforms, local groups buzzed with commentary. Some shared their own experiences of feeling intimidated by the HOA's strict regulations, while others praised David's courage in standing up for his rights. "It's time we take back our community," one post declared, capturing the sentiment of many who felt marginalized by Margaret's aggressive enforcement of rules. Margaret, once revered as a strong leader, now found herself isolated and scrutinized. The community's shift in perspective was palpable. Her authority appeared increasingly fragile as residents began questioning not just her decisions but also the legitimacy of the entire HOA structure. This moment marked a turning point, igniting a movement toward greater transparency and fairness within Lakeview Estates, a direct response to Margaret's missteps that could reshape their community for years to come. In the wake of this conflict, the significance of property rights and individual autonomy became central to discussions within Lakeview Estates. David Thompson's resolute stand not only illuminated the dangers of unchecked authority but also empowered residents to reclaim their rights against an overreaching HOA president. Margaret Sinclair, once seen as a pillar of the community, now faced public embarrassment and a crisis of confidence as her credibility crumbled amid mounting pressure from outraged neighbors. Residents began advocating for changes in how the HOA operated, calling for clearer guidelines on governance and greater transparency in decision-making processes. The emotional cost of battling Margaret's obstinacy had ignited a movement towards restoring balance and fairness within the community. Many began attending HOA meetings with newfound assertiveness, demanding accountability, and proposing new regulations designed to protect homeowners and ensure that no single individual could wield excessive control. The implications of this conflict reached beyond personal grievances. They sparked a broader conversation about governance in suburban communities. The realization that power could easily be abused awakened a collective consciousness among homeowners regarding their rights and voices in shaping local policies. As the dust settled and tensions eased, David felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not just for himself but for every resident who yearned for respect and fairness. His fight against Margaret wasn't merely a challenge to her authority, it was a testament to the enduring value of individual liberties and self-determination in safeguarding their shared home. The lessons learned from this confrontation would echo throughout Lakeview Estates, fostering an environment committed to equality, respect, and mutual governance in the years to come.